Hello and welcome everyone to our discussion on the speed of decision, how leaders accelerate strategic clarity, responsiveness, and execution in rapidly changing environments. Happy to have you join us today. Thank you for joining. A few webinar reminders and points to mention before we get started. The purpose today of our discussion is to exhibit how effective leaders and boards improve decision velocity, accelerate execution, reduce organizational friction, and create greater strategic clarity. Write your questions in the Q&A section. We'll answer those today at the end of our presentation. The materials, yes, the entire webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a link to this via email in the next day or so, and you'll also be able to download the presentation deck in its own separate file for reference. IBDC.D certification holders will receive 1 CPE credit by attending. Just be sure to follow proper CPE credit submission guidelines. I am your speaker and host today, Mark Pfister. I'm a governance and strategy expert. I'm known as the board architect. My book, Across the Board, is now in over 70 countries, and I'm the creator of the International Board Director Competency Designation, both in education and certification program globally. All right, let's get started. Our goals for today regarding the speed of decision. I want to talk a little bit about why decision velocity matters, especially in today's business environments. We're going to talk about information overload. There's probably many of you smiling as you're hearing this right now. We are in a total information overload as it relates to making decisions. We'll talk also about this concept of governance friction, what the side effects of this are, and how to get out of this friction area as it relates to governance. Consensus drag, I'll leave that for our discussion when we get to that section. Strategic hesitation, another area where we think we need more information, or we have to better understand the strategy before we make a decision or make part decisions to foster us getting to a goal. And then we'll end today's discussion with building a high velocity decision environment. How do you get to the point where you are making informed but quick decisions? Very important for leadership to be viewed as a group or an individual that's making these high velocity decisions, especially in today's environments. And then, of course, I'll leave you with a few key takeaways and leadership actions to enhance the speed of decision, whether it's for you individually or for your board of directors or any leadership position or team. So let's first start with this modern challenge. And today we have this inability, a growing inability to make aligned, meaningful decisions quickly enough. We're seeing this in boards of directors. We're seeing this at the CEO levels. We're seeing this at all management levels throughout organizations. This is tricky because we are in this accelerating business environment, and organizations are struggling, not from this lack of intelligence or strategy, but the inability to make these aligned and meaningful decisions quickly. This is really the basis of our discussion today. And if we look at the maturity path that we want to bring an organization or an individual leader on, we want to look at these hidden forces that slow this organizational responsiveness, including information overload, governance friction, a few of the additional areas we're going to speak about today. We want to move this and graduate this into an improved decision velocity. We want to accelerate execution. We want to reduce organizational friction. All these things that allow for these disruptions and this constant change to not really throw us off as it relates to our ability and speed of making proper and good decisions. So let's first start out with why decision velocity matters. The ability to move from information to action has become truly a competitive differentiator. Organizations that are able to do this are truly pulling ahead from their competitors. We're in this environment of disruption, complexity, of course, accelerating change. Organizations that have a process or a formula for making these decisions with the proper information, but at an increased speed, are truly at a competitive advantage. And organizations rarely fail because they lack intelligence. We have access to information. They fail because they cannot align, decide, and execute quickly enough. This again will bring us to our conversation on this velocity area. So let's start out with the concept of this. Speed, as I mentioned, has truly become a strategic advantage. Markets, technologies, competitors, customer expectations, they now change faster than traditional decision cycles. This is a fact. We see this in organizations that simply can't keep up with the speed of what their markets require or their customer expectations require. Remember also that delayed decisions are decisions. Inaction often carries greater risk than making an imperfect but informed decision. This will sort of also play into all of the areas of discussion today about how do we get to decisions knowing that we may not have all the detail. It may not be the final decision for this strategic area or for this governance area, but we have to make some sort of progress towards our end goal. So delays in themselves are decisions by the board or by leadership. And decision velocity also drives execution. We have to always make that correlation. Organizations cannot execute faster than they can decide. The ones that do come across as extremely misaligned or where lines of business are not in lockstep across the organization. They're each making their own decisions because of the lack of the overall directional decision of the organization. Now, the boardroom insight that we get from this is that the board is responsible for overseeing long-term organizational competitiveness. If decision making is constantly slow, the organization's strategy, responsiveness, and ability to create value are all impaired. Typically, we see this in alignment with the board of directors. If the board is making slow decisions, the CEO then is also, of course, making slow decisions or not able to convey to the organization what these decisions are, these important decisions. If the board and the CEO are indeed making quick decisions, or I should say, decisions that are responsive, and it is at a faster speed, again, assuming that they have the right information to make these decisions, this trickles down throughout the entire organization. So typically, when we see boardrooms that are not able to make decisions, we know that that's also propagating across the entire organization's environment. Now we move also into this information overload concept. And when we talk about this, what we're really saying here is that leaders struggle to act because they're overwhelmed by data, reports, dashboards, and competing inputs. So just because we have access to more information than ever before doesn't necessarily make us better leaders. In fact, in some cases, it makes us not as effective in our leadership roles. So this information overload, more information does not automatically, as I mentioned, create better decisions or better leaders for that matter. Excessive data can obscure rather than clarify priorities. Analysis paralysis. We use this word even more increasingly now. This used to be something we talked about years ago. Now we are in the point where the amount of data is truly causing this paralysis in the decision-making processes, especially within boards of directors. So teams often continue gathering information long after sufficient information exists. And also, strategic clarity matters more than data volume. This, of course, makes sense. We know this, but we're getting sucked into this realm now of having unbelievable amounts of data that we feel we need to make decisions. It's not wrong to get data. We just have to make sure it's the right data and focused data for our decisions. So leaders need relevant insights, not endless reporting. So boards now, if we look at the boardroom insight from this, boards frequently receive large volumes of material. These board books, if you're on a board, serving on a board of directors, you're probably noticing this also. We like to say that best case practice is that boards are receiving a week in advance of a board meeting, the board book with the information to be reviewed for decision making and voting during a board meeting. It is getting to the point where the amount of information that's going out from many boards is not even able to be reviewed in that week with putting sufficient amount of time or significant amount of time towards that review. We have to get back to this focused type of data that's helping us make the decision, not necessarily just educating or informing us of all the aspects or the risks areas that could be encountered. So there's a volume of information that is practical for most decisions that need to be made. This excessive detail is truly bogging down decisions across organizations currently. Now, this is also creating what we call governance friction. So poorly designed structures, unclear authority, unnecessary approval layers are unintentionally slowing down decision making in organizations. We see this in organizations that are either not formalized in their process or they simply don't have a process at all in terms of escalations or decision making. So the concept of this governance friction and some of the background details, unclear decision rights create delays. Teams hesitate when ownership and authority are ambiguous. So for example, if we look at a risk escalation process, and we talk about this in the IBDC program, a risk escalation process, each layer of the organization or leadership area should understand its ability to make decisions within an area of defined budget, scope, and time. There's truly nothing that falls outside of the budget, scope, and time area when a decision needs to be made. When an area is not, or a leader is not aware of what their decision-making authority is within each budget, scope, and time area, this is where we have to escalate this. This is what creates governance friction. It moves decisions out of areas where they should be able to be made and escalates into areas that truly should not have to deal with those types of decisions. Too many approvals reduce responsiveness. So this excessive escalation obviously can slow execution and discourage initiative. This should be very obvious to those in leadership positions. And know that good governance truly enables speed. So effective governance creates clarity, accountability, and confidence. It goes back to the budget, scope, and time methodology I mentioned a moment ago. This good governance, if the areas of budget, scope, and time are defined, allows for decisions to be made. Even if they have to be escalated, the decision can still proceed with the escalation being more of a notification than a request for input or a request for decisioning. And the boardroom insight that we get from this is that boards should regularly evaluate whether governance structures are enabling effective oversight or creating this unnecessary drag. Governance should be an accelerator, not a bottleneck. We read about this quite frequently now when we see that innovation areas of organizations or innovation departments, if they view the governance aspect as slowing them down or not adding value or becoming not inhibiting them or inhibiting them to proceed, then the governance model is actually not working properly. Good governance should actually accelerate innovation in an organization. And this is where we talk about the friction aspect of this. This is the other side of it. The friction can slow innovation, slow speed to market, create inefficiencies in the environment, and also create frustrations across workers or teams in any organization. Now, consensus drag. This is one that for me is quite. I'll call it a challenge in understanding why teams are having these challenges currently. I'm going to talk about this right now. So, the pursuit of excessive consensus can delay action and weaken accountability. So, what we're really getting at here is we don't want to confuse alignment with unanimous agreement. So, consensus should inform decisions, number one, and not prevent them. So, seeking endless agreement can create organizational stagnation. If we are constantly looking for everyone to agree on a certain topic, it is not going to happen. Boards are falling into this trap currently where they want everybody to agree. The whole point of a board either having a a majority vote or a super majority vote is knowing that we're not going to always have everybody agree on a certain topic or something that's up for decisioning. So we have to understand that there will be people with dissenting viewpoints, but that should not hold up the decision from going to the execution stage. Now, leadership also requires making decisions amid disagreement. Again, another topic directly on this consensus drag. Waiting for complete alignment is totally unrealistic. I would say if you're on a board currently or working on a team currently or leading a team currently that is expecting to have this unanimous alignment, I think you need to level set with these groups to make sure they understand that you can have a dissenting viewpoint. You're welcome to talk about it, but no, we have to come quickly to an alignment and to the execution actions that follow the agreement or a majority agreement. And then, of course, the clear accountability improves decision speed. Somebody must ultimately own the decision. Now, the reason that this sets very clearly within the consensus drag area is that knowing that somebody has accountability for the decision that's made, either individually or within a group, can help in creating the channels for the reporting to know how that decision is actually being implemented, what the success of it is, or what the challenges are within the organization. So appointing the accountability area or the single point of contact, or in the case of a board, a committee, a group of individuals who serve on the board, the accountability is extremely important to make sure the consensus is not viewed as typically unanimous, or I should say as unanimous, but getting to the point where you have that single point of accountability. Now, the boardroom insight into this is that boards routinely balance diverse perspectives, of course, but effective boards encourage robust discussion while also maintaining the discipline to reach decisions and move forward without endless deliberation. I see a question coming in already on this, which we'll get to at the end of the conversation here, that comes back to this endless deliberation. My pleasure to answer that shortly. Okay, the strategic hesitation, another area here that we look at as it relates to the speed of decision making. Many organizations recognize emerging risks and opportunities. However, they delay the action due to uncertainty, fear of being wrong, or concern about stakeholder reactions. Now, if we look at this more deeply in strategic hesitation, uncertainty is now a permanent aspect of decision making. We have to get over this. We have to get comfortable with the fact that the uncertainty is permanent. We are going to deal with this going forward, especially with the technology enhancements that we're leveraging in our everyday decisions. So leaders cannot wait anymore for perfect visibility before acting. This is where judgment comes into play. For those who read the Across the Board article this month, the judgment aspect becomes even more important as it relates to information where the uncertainty aspect is still living within that decision area. Strategic opportunities often have expiration dates. Very important concept here. Delayed action can eliminate competitive advantage. Now, there are organizations that will wait to see what their competitors' decisions are before they act. I can understand this. However, in today's world where one organization in a sea of many can get a competitive advantage by launching a product or a service earlier, it may not be perfect. We understand this. However, their name becomes associated, their brand becomes associated with that product or service. That is unstoppable as it relates to the future marketability and usefulness of that product or that brand or that organization's services. So the speed to this opportunity, especially as it relates to innovation, is quite important. You'll hear me use throughout today's presentation the word of innovation. I think there are so many links to the speed of decisioning as it relates to innovation as well. You could have the best product, but it comes out a few weeks late. Your name and your brand will not be associated with that as compared to someone who comes out with it first. And confidence comes from preparedness, not certainty. This is something I will admit I struggle with as well. I want to be certain about something before I make a decision or proceed with this, with anything. But I've come to realize, and I'm still working on the aspect of formulating my thought process in my brain to be able to act without complete information. So organizations must learn to act without full information. I may have listed this backwards here, but confidence comes from the preparedness. Know your blind spots, know what you know the areas that we're going to have to work out, do proper risk assessments. This will help with the strategic hesitation you may witness within your board or within your organization currently. So the boardroom insight here, boards are even more frequently called upon to guide organizations through uncertainty. Their ability to support informed risk taking, as I've mentioned, can significantly influence organizational responsiveness and long-term success. I find today also with boards that when the initial decision is made years ago, that initial decision moved from the decision into the governance model of how are we doing with our decision? What's the progress against it? Let's measure our budget scope and time against it. Today, it's slightly different, or I should say it's worlds different in that the decision is made and the revisiting in the early stages, especially, is to evaluate the decision itself or the inputs to the decision to make sure simultaneously that the governance is not only looking at the effectiveness and the delivery, but is the premise still correct? And we have to get into this mode of constantly revisiting these decisions without becoming in this paralysis mode. Now, building a high velocity decision environment. This is really a mindset that I want you to keep in mind as we talk about this. So, organizations that consistently make quality decisions at speed, they intentionally design systems, processes, and cultures that support rapid alignment and execution. Not an easy thing to do. I know it's easier said than done. So, number one, decision rights should be clearly defined. I'm quite amazed in much of my consulting and advisory work for boards that when a major decision has to be made, the board weighs in, but they're not quite sure across the organization outside of the CEO who will take the decision-making ownership of that after that decision is made. So everyone should understand who decides, who advises, and who executes the decision. Strategic priorities must be visible. This is obviously a key area of making sure that high velocity decisions are made within any environment. So, clear priorities simplify decision making throughout the entire organization. The board and leadership need to live by these priorities also. And trust, of course, accelerates decisions. High trust organizations spend less time validating and revalidating every action. So, I see in many cases, just to give a good example of this, a committee is either formed or it's part of a standing committee on a board. They obviously have ownership of an area that their expertise aligns to. They come back and present and show all the data and the details and the background of how they've come to their decision. And the remaining board is not trusting of the research or the decision that they came to. This can lead us into this paralysis again of that decision. It's not to say that we shouldn't ask questions, but we should be able to trust the team or the committee or the individuals who are working to solve this and bring us the options for us to take a vote or to make a decision on. If you don't trust the individuals making the proposal, that's a whole different story. I would tell you to reevaluate the board or those that are on the committee if it's relating to a board. But if you do trust those people in those areas of supplying you with information to your options to make decisions from, then I would tell you that you have to move more into this mindset of this trust accelerating the decisions and leverage that as much as possible. So remember, boards influence directly organizational design, leadership accountability, governance structures, and of course, culture through its values. These factors collectively determine how quickly the organization can respond to change. This is a great exercise to go through with your board if you're serving on a board or the chair of a board to see if the accountability and the governance structures truly match to how you're making decisions. Get to the point of where this is helping you make high velocity decisions with the proper data, with the proper input, and you'll move into a realm of meetings becoming shorter, more confidence in your decisions, and trusting those who are offering up the options for you to vote on. So a few key takeaways and leadership actions before we get to Q&A. Quite a few questions coming in here. Decision velocity is not necessarily about making faster decisions. It's about creating the conditions that allow organizations to make high quality decisions quickly and consistently. Keep in mind that word consistently. This is not a one and done type exercise. This is about creating a culture in your environment that the consistency behind how decisions are made repeat themselves. So in order to do this, remember, decision velocity is an organizational capability. It's a quality of the organization. It can be designed, it can be measured, and it, of course, can be improved. The goal is speed along with judgment. So fast decisions without quality create risk. Quality without speed creates irrelevance. You want to get to the point where you are requesting and receiving the proper information, the focused information to make a decision with speed along with the judgment aspects that are hopefully correlated to that decision. And remember, the competitive advantage increasingly belongs to responsive organizations, getting to decisions quickly with the proper information. Organizations that align, decide, and execute faster are often better positioned to succeed. So the boardroom insight from this, the board's responsibility, remember, extends beyond oversight of simply today's performance. It must measure the organization, ensure the organization is structured and governed to remain responsive, competitive, and resilient in this environment of continuous change. This is kind of a given. It's good to remind ourselves of this quite frequently, and we need to evaluate our decision-making bodies, whether that be a board or in an organization. Are we truly following this mantra and this decision-making process? Now, let me leave you here before Q&A with a few things that can be viewed as warning signs. So what are these warning signs that an organization is suffering from low decision velocity? And there's a list of a few here. Repeated revisiting of previously made decisions. This is becoming quite prevalent in boardrooms today. Excessive approval layers. This can be in typically throughout the organization. I like to think of this also, the correlation of this to the escalation processes in organizations. Constant requests for more data. Again, quite common to see this in boardrooms. It's not wrong to ask for more data, but I do think there needs to be a set time for debate. So if someone's requesting data during the decision-making time, that to me is a shortcoming of that director. Meetings that end without decisions. If you see the same topic over and over again on meeting minutes or in the agenda for that particular board meeting, you have a problem. Slow responses to market changes. Strategic initiatives that linger without execution. This is a scary one. Usually a lot of budget goes against this, of course, budget and time. And frequent escalation of routine decisions. I touched on this earlier as it relates to escalation processes. If your board is dealing with low-level escalations, meaning that they are topics that you feel should be solutioned within the environment, then again, you're looking at a warning sign as it relates to decision, not just velocity, but the process of escalation. So keep these areas in mind, look for these. Use this as a checklist for things that raise to the level of the board of directors or to senior levels within an organization. They truly are warning signs that something is off in the organization based on the areas we discussed today. Quickly, before we move to Q&A, if you are not familiar with the International Board Director Competency Designation, I would ask you check it out. Everything we discussed today is within this program, as well as all other areas relating to your board director candidate packaging and modern day board operations. All right, let's look at a few of the questions that are coming in right now. So many of the listed challenges resonate with me as it relates to my board. Where do I start the correction process? I have some leverage as I am the chairperson. Absolutely. So number one, I think you first and foremost need to gain alignment on the issues. Is it a decision issue? And do others agree that there is a problem? See if this truly is something that the others on your board are looking to solution. And prioritize, I would think about prioritizing focus on a specific roadblock. Now, as I say that, I want you to think about this for a board of directors. One is, of course, you are overseeing and governing and weighing in on the overall organization strategy, but every board should also have its own strategy as it relates to how it operates internally itself. So think about this prioritization of the focus on these particular roadblocks internally to the board as part of its own board internal strategic initiative. Come up with areas or look for areas that can be fixed within the board, make that part of the improvement aspects through a strategic planning of the board itself. And of course, just to be funny, I'll say you can engage me also. I do quite a bit of this work as it relates to making boards more efficient and more effective. So you have the ability to reach out to me as well. Let me move to another question here. Bear with me one second. It seems to me that many times when boards are notified of a situation, the board interprets that as management asking the board for a decision versus just a notification. That is true. That is true. We need to be able to differentiate between a notification versus a decisioning point. And I think this is more of a comment than a question, but keep in mind that mature directors know that when they are opening their mouth, it is adding to the conversation, driving to a decision, not just a comment about how much you know. So, if you're serving on a board where you have individuals that are making comments that don't enhance the decision or drive to a conclusion, I welcome other directors to start as their repertoire of questions to ask the person that's proposing this comment or this question, how is that helping us drive to a decision? How is that enhancing the outcome of our decision? You have every right to ask those decisions or ask those questions to drive to proper decisions. Okay, another question. I witnessed that my CEO is taking longer to make decisions and even struggling to present strategies. This is quite a long question. I'm going to read through this. I serve on a strategic planning committee, and this is causing some worry with other directors. This strategic hesitation, as you have called it, is challenging to overcome due to the board wanting to due to the board wanting to be deeply involved in decision making and frequently request more information, as they say, to make more informed decisions. We are in a certain degree of paralysis. Any suggestions on how to rectify this? Absolutely. Some of the topics we spoke about today. So let's look back to the discussion on high velocity decision environments. Are we following the methodology where we are getting the proper information, not overloaded with information? Do we understand who decides, who advises, and who executes? That can truly focus a question to get to a point of decisioning without exploding this question into multiple areas where we can't answer it in one short response. And again, I'll go back to something I mentioned earlier about placing timeframes on decisions. If I enter a board meeting and I know that in that meeting we're coming to final conclusion, I'm going to make sure that any questions I have are going to be answered even offline prior to that meeting. I'm not going to throw a wrench in the works in the board meeting at time of voting. It's going to show me as being unprepared if I'm doing this. I want to make sure I come in fully prepared to be able to vote. I'm going to find out my information early. Start to check and to manage in the boardroom to these types of conversations. If you're getting newly proposed questions, unless they are absolutely urgent or only came up 5 minutes before the meeting, if those are coming up at decision-making time, you know you have the wrong type of culture and environment in your boardroom. Okay, another question. I see all 7 of the mentioned warning signs of slow decision velocity on my board. Am I at risk serving on this board? Let me first say that remember that serving on any board, you have risks. Hence the reason in the course we talk about making sure there's indemnification in place, that D&O insurance is in place, and as I always recommend, IDL, independent director liability insurance, that you have that as well, even if you're paying for that yourself out of your pocket. But I will say this to the question here. If you are seeing some or all of those warning signs I mentioned, I can tell you there needs to be some reworking of that board, either through culturally how that board operates or potentially the changing out of individuals on that board. It doesn't sound to me like they're operating at what I would expect of a senior level leader serving properly on a board if you feel that those derailers are present within either all your directors or some of your directors. And take that word to heart that I used of derailing. Derailing is truly an issue with boards today, with directors that don't truly understand the level that they should probe or go into or ask questions about within a board meeting or even offline in a committee meeting. Okay, next question here. This is more of a comment. Our board is confusing alignment with unanimous agreement. Absolutely. Again, I appreciate this comment. We have to, again, get back to this understanding that not everyone will like us, not everyone will agree with us. This is why boards are voting bodies. Either a majority or a supermajority is defined for decisions within a boardroom. So if you change your mindset that you're not trying to get everybody to agree, it allows you to actually state your point more clearly and more directly. Don't worry about everybody agreeing or everybody disagreeing with you. Get to the point where you're making your point and you're backing it up with the data and you're backing it up with trending or something that can show the others to help drive them to a decision. And of course, I'll mention again, set the time for the debate on this. There are boards that go through endless debate. I've seen the same agenda item follow through for all 4 or 6 of their board meetings throughout the year. They're in a paralysis stage. So set the time for decision making. It doesn't stop a board or a CEO or other leaders in an organization from revisiting that even once they're executing. In fact, I welcome that. I think that should be part of the process. So get to the point of decisioning, set that time for debate. Don't worry about unanimous agreement. Most boards are not set up this way anyway, as it relates to their either majority or supermajority for a vote to move on to either execution or rework. Okay, another question. How do you view a board's awareness or ability to identify execution risk in the board presentation? If I'm reading this correctly, I'm understanding the question to be, is the board skilled enough to understand not just the strategic aspect of it, but also the organization's ability to identify the risk in the execution, if I'm reading this correctly. Um, if that is the question, then I'll go back to something we also go through in the course where we talk about proper board architecture. And board architecture is not just about having specific skill sets on your board, but the expertise and experience of those skill sets to have been applied in an operations or an operational environment. What I'm getting at with this is that this is about right sizing a strategy for the organization's delivery capabilities. So, a some of the best strategies have never been able to be implemented successfully in an environment because they don't have the operational capability to execute properly. So, if I'm answering this question properly or understanding the question properly, those with operational ability make great directors above and beyond just their vertical knowledge spaces because they're able to identify the execution risk based on their operational knowledge. I hope that answers the question. Okay. I don't see any other questions. I thank you for joining today. I hope you found this helpful. Start to test out some of these concepts. Ask these questions of your board. See where they feel you are, or the overall board is, or your team. Some easy ways to evaluate based on the warning signs as well. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon. Bye now.